Imagine, if you will, just packing your bags for a quick, like, 3-week visit to see a sick relative.
Right, just a short trip.
Exactly. You toss in a few sweaters, maybe a couple of books to pass the time, and you figure, you'll be back at your desk, back to your daily grind before the month is even out.
Which is a perfectly reasonable expectation.
Totally. But then you take a train up into the mountains,
Yeah.
and the physical elevation begins to rise. The air gets incredibly thin.
Yeah.
And the world you left behind, I mean, the emails, the obligations, the very concept of a standard Tuesday, it all just begins to blur and fade.
They're completely gone.
Right. And somehow that quick 3-week trip just stretches into a bizarre, isolated 7-year stay.
Wow. 7 years.
Yeah. You find yourself completely swallowed by this strange, hermetically sealed world where time just no longer functions the way you thought it did.
It's a premise that sounds almost like a modern psychological thriller.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Or perhaps, a Twilight Zone scenario that's just designed to test the limits of human sanity. But it is, in fact, the exact journey we are exploring today, alongside a rather ordinary young engineer named Hans Castorp.
Which is why today's mission for our deep dive is to unpack this truly monumental piece of literature, which is Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain.
It's a massive undertaking.
It really is. We are pulling from the incredibly rich excerpts of Johnny Woods' brilliant translation, alongside some really razor-sharp insights from an introduction by the novelist A.S. Byatt.
Yes, Byatt's introduction is absolutely essential here.
Definitely. And our goal here today is to take this massive 1,000-page exploration of time, of disease, and of the human spirit, and distill it into the most fascinating, mind-bending takeaways.
Right, to really break it down.
Because if you are listening to this right now, I guarantee this isn't just a story about a guy stuck in a Swiss hospital in the early 1900s.
Not at all.
It is fundamentally about how you view your own life, your own routines, and the very subtle, comfortable ways you might be, hiding from the world right now.
That's a great way to frame it. Because to truly understand how we arrive at those profound existential questions, we really must first look at the soil from which this story germinated.
Yeah, the real-world background.
Exactly. It is rooted in a highly specific real-life event. So in 1912, Thomas Mann himself actually visited his wife Katja at a sanatorium in Davos, Switzerland.
Okay.
She was suffering from a lung complaint, which was a very common affliction of that era. But the historical irony of this visit is just staggering.
Oh, wait, what happened?
Well, Katja, as it turned out, was likely misdiagnosed.
No way.
Yeah. However, Mann, who visited her for just a few weeks and then hurried back down to the normal, active world, what the book pointedly calls the flatlands, he was later discovered to actually bear the internal biological marks of a prior tubercular illness himself.
That is wild.
Right.
So, the man who essentially ran away from the mountain of the sick, the man who fled back to normal life, was the one carrying the shadow of the disease all along.
Indeed. And it was out of this exact irony that Mann originally intended The Magic Mountain to be a comic piece.
Really? A comedy?
Yes.
Yeah.
He had just finished writing Death in Venice, which is a classically constructed, incredibly heavy tragedy about the fatal decline of a great artist.
Right. Very serious.
Very. So he envisioned this news story as a satyr play.
A satyr play. Remind me what that is.
So in ancient Greek theater, a satyr play was a comic, almost parodic companion piece that provided comic relief right after a heavy tragedy.
Oh, I see.
Mann basically wanted to write a comedy about a perfectly average, somewhat uninspired young man getting caught up in the macabre hypochondriac dance of death among the eccentric patients of a high-altitude sanatorium.
That sounds like a dark comedy for sure.
It does. But then the absolute devastation of the First World War intervened. The project was put on hold, and when Mann returned to it years later, the text had just ballooned into something far more profound, really reflecting the ideological shattering of the European psyche.
Wow. Okay, I want to start by dissecting that initial arrival, because the way Mann describes Hans Castorp's journey up the mountain is deeply unsettling, in the best possible way.
It's incredibly atmospheric.
It really is. So Hans is traveling from his hometown of Hamburg, which is right at sea level, up to the International Sanatorium Burghof in Davos, which sits at an elevation of about 5,300 feet.
Quite the climb.
Yeah. And reading about this train ride, it felt exactly like watching someone enter a sensory deprivation tank.
Oh, that's an interesting analogy. I see the parallel you're drawing. Break down the mechanics of that sensory deprivation for us. How does the text actually achieve that effect?
Well, think about what a sensory deprivation tank actually does to the human brain.
It removes stimuli?
Exactly. It strips away all the normal environmental inputs, gravity, ambient sound, light, the tangible passage of the hours until your brain, starved of external reality, starts to alter its own perception.
Right.
As Hans climbs higher and higher on this narrow-gauge railway, he physically leaves behind the flatlands. And the flatlands are critical here.
They are the anchor.
Yes. They represent everything grounded in practical reality. His engineering career, his civic responsibilities, his understanding of what constitutes a normal, productive day.
His whole identity, really.
Exactly. And Mann explicitly writes that space starts to do the work of time. It brings about forgetfulness. It puts Hans in this pristine, almost vagabond state.
A state of suspension.
Yeah. The sheer physical elevation literally distorts his sense of time and reality before he even unpacks his alligator valise.
It is a masterful atmospheric setup. When he steps off that train, he doesn't just enter a hospital. He enters a realm that is hermetically sealed from the march of normal chronological time.
It's like time just stops working.
It really does. Even the meteorology, the very seasons, refuse to behave up there. Hans's cousin, Joachim, who is the patient Hans is originally visiting, explains to him that the seasons are just a, well, he calls it a higgledy-piggledy mess.
Higgledy-piggledy, that's a great phrase.
It is. It snows in August. It can be blistering hot in the dead of winter. There are days that feel like summer and days that feel like winter, but there is no overarching, reliable cycle of seasons to really anchor human consciousness.
And without those anchors, without Monday feeling like Monday or October feeling like October, they just fall into this bizarre, almost hypnotic, repetitive routine.
The famous rest cure.
Yes, the rest cure. The specifics of this routine are mind-boggling. Hans is introduced to this highly engineered, polished, reddish-brown balcony lounge chair with exactly 3 cushions and a neck roll.
Very specific.
Very. And the patients just lie out there on their balconies.
Measuring their internal temperatures.
Yes.
Yes.
Measuring their temperature with a literal mercury thermometer, kept under the tongue for exactly 7 minutes at a time, multiple times a day.
Obsessively.
It's as if time has stopped moving forward linearly and instead is just being measured in these tiny, obsessive 7-minute increments of self-scrutiny.
And this is where we must unpack the heavy mythology that Mann weaves into the very architecture of this setting.
Mythology. Like Greek myths.
Among others, yes. The mountain itself is not just a geological feature. It is a powerful archetype. Baya points out in her introduction that in German literature, the magic mountain evokes the Brocken.
The Brocken.
Yes, the infamous site of the Walpurgis Night in Goethe's Faust, where witches gather in a state of chaotic suspension.
Oh, right. The witches' Sabbath.
Exactly. It also evokes the Venusberg from Wagner's Tannhäuser, which is a secret subterranean dwelling where time slows to a crawl and nights are lured in, trapped forever by sensual, numbing delights.
Wow.
And of course, it echoes Nietzsche's Olympian magic mountain from The Birth of Tragedy.
So it's essentially a mythological roach motel. You check in, but you don't check out.
I wouldn't use those exact words, but the sentiment holds true. The trap is deeply mythological.
Yeah.
Even the thermometer you mentioned carries immense mythic resonance. The liquid inside the glass is mercury.
Right.
In Roman mythology, Mercury is the equivalent of the Greek Hermes. And we must ask, what was Hermes' primary role?
He was the messenger, right.
He was a messenger, but crucially, he was the psychopomp. He was the divine guide whose specific job was to safely lead the souls of the recently deceased away from the world of the living and down into the realm of the dead.
Oh, wow. I never made that connection.
So the act of Hans sitting in his 3-cushion chair, obsessively measuring his fever with mercury, is symbolically Hans allowing himself to be guided by the psychopomp deeper and deeper into the underworld of this sanatorium.
That is deeply creepy. But also fascinating because Hans doesn't really put up a fight. He arrives carrying a book titled Ocean Steamships.
Yes, his engineering textbook.
Right. That book is the physical manifestation of his practical flatland engineering future. It's his ambition. But almost immediately, the book is collecting soot on the train, and within days, he completely abandons it.
He forgets his purpose entirely.
Exactly. He surrenders to the mountain so quickly. And I was trying to relate this to our modern experience, and I thought about what happens when you get a truly terrible bout of the flu, or even when you go on a totally disconnected off-the-grid retreat.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Within 48 hours, your sense of urgency just evaporates. You don't know what day of the week it is. You stop checking your emails. You stop caring about your career trajectory.
The world shrinks.
Yeah. Illness or total isolation gives you this weird hall pass from the pressures of time and progress. But the question I kept asking while reading these sources is, isn't this suspension of time a dangerous trap? Isn't he essentially just giving up on life?
Well, I would push back slightly on the framing of it as simply giving up. It is absolutely a trap, yes, but it is simultaneously a crucible.
Okay, what do you mean by a crucible?
The critical term here, drawn directly from the sources, is alchemical. The mountain acts as an alchemical vessel. Hans embraces a state of mind that he refers to as playing king.
Playing king.
Yes. This is his terminology for his deeply contemplative, almost entirely self-indulgent ruminations while lying on his balcony.
Just staring off into space.
Basically. Down in the flatlands, he was an ordinary, unreflecting, fundamentally bourgeois engineer. He accepted the world exactly as it was.
Right. Very practical.
But up on the mountain, completely freed from the economic and social necessity of producing anything of value, the environment acts upon him. It enhances him.
Oh, I see.
The alchemical process transubstantiates him from a blank slate into a man deeply obsessed with the underlying mysteries of life, biology, the cosmos, and existence itself.
But that's the danger, right? Once you take away the flatlands, once the outside world falls away and you're just sitting in a chair playing king, the human mind still needs something to chew on.
It craves input.
Exactly. If it doesn't have a bridge to build or an ocean steamship to design, it looks for abstract conflict. And for Hans, that means he gets completely swept up in the fierce ideological battles of the other patients.
The pedagogues.
Yeah, the Burghof is packed with this highly eccentric cast of characters who basically serve as avatars for the warring ideologies of pre-war Europe.
Precisely. Because Hans arrives as the ultimate alchemical blank slate, he is fiercely fought over by two incredibly articulate, brilliant, and honestly exhausting intellectual mentors.
They never stop talking.
Never. The first is a man named Settembrini. Settembrini is an Italian humanist, a writer, and a Freemason.
He's the optimist, right?
Yes, very much so. He champions the values of reason, continuous progress, civilization, and above all else, active life. He holds the fundamental belief that humans are inherently good and that through dedicated social action, democratic reform, and rational thought, humanity can eventually perfect society.
So he thinks the sickness on the mountain is bad.
Exactly. He views the sickness of the mountain as a moral failing, a surrender to darkness.
And in the opposite corner, ready to just tear all of that down, we have NAFTA.
Yes. Leo Nafta is a staggering, terrifying intellectual creation. He is a Jewish-born man who has converted and become a Jesuit priest.
Quite the background.
Indeed. He is a cynic, a reactionary, what the text quite literally frames as a terrorist of the intellect.
Wow.
Where Settembrini praises health, sunlight, and rational debate, Nafta vehemently defends illness, torture, the irrational, and the deep mystical pull of death.
He sounds delightful.
He's intense.
Yeah.
He argues that true, profound knowledge only comes from extreme physical and spiritual suffering. He believes that the rational, comfortable, bourgeois world that Settembrini loves so dearly is fundamentally soulless, doomed, and absolutely deserves to be destroyed by any means necessary.
Reading their endless debates in the text, I couldn't help but map them onto the way we consume information today.
How so?
Well, if you are listening to this right now, I want you to imagine Settembrini and NAFTA as two opposing algorithmic feeds on modern social media.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Imagine you have two separate accounts. One feed is purely Settembrini. It is relentlessly optimistic, progressive, highly rationalist, filled with we can solve climate change with green technology and humanity is getting better every decade type of content.
Right. The sunny side of the internet.
Exactly. But the other feed is pure NAFTA. It is cynical, chaotic, doom-scrolling nihilism. It tells you the system is irreparably broken, institutions are corrupt, and suffering is the only authentic truth left.
The dark web of the soul.
Yeah. So if you are Hans Castorp, sitting in a chair for 7 years, completely isolated, toggling between these two extreme feeds all day, every day, how do you keep from losing your mind? How does he process this?
To understand how Hans processes it, we really must first look at how Mann, the author, processed it.
Right, because he wrote both of them.
Exactly. The sources reveal that Thomas Mann was using these two characters to hash out intense, real-world debates he was having with his own brother, Heinrich Mann.
Oh, his brother was a writer, too.
Yes. And during the incredibly tense years of World War I, they argued constantly. Heinrich fiercely defended French civilization, which he defined by reason, enlightenment, democracy, and progress.
So Heinrich is Settembrini.
Very much so. Thomas, conversely, defended German culture, which he associated with a deep connection to nature, military virtue, irrationality, and the depths of the soul.
Okay, so Thomas is NAFTA.
Well, partially. But what makes The Magic Mountain a masterpiece is that Mann, the novelist, remains entirely impartial. He does not use the narrative to endorse either extreme.
He just presents them.
Exactly. He simply places them in a confined space and lets the pressure build.
He just lets them fight it out inside Hans's brain.
He does. And the critical takeaway from Hans's education here is that it is not about choosing Team Settembrini or Team NAFTA.
Right.
As the years bleed together, Hans slowly develops the critical capacity to see the inherent flaws in both absolutes. He realizes that Settembrini, for all his noble intentions and love of humanity, is ultimately a bit of a windbag.
A windbag?
Yes, Hans calls him an organ grinder, playing one single repetitive tune, resolutely unaware of the darker, messier, more chaotic parts of the human soul that just cannot be legislated away.
But NAFTA isn't the winner either.
No, NAFTA is equally, if not more, flawed. Hans recognizes that NAFTA's razor-sharp logic is actually a dangerous guazzabuglio.
Wait, what was that word?
Guazzabuglio. It means a confused jumble, a hubbub of terror that ultimately leads nowhere but the void.
Ah, love that word.
It's very evocative. Hans learns that true wisdom is not about adopting an ideology wholesale. It is about absorbing the conflict. He listens to the thesis and the antithesis, trying to synthesize a much broader, more tolerant understanding of the human condition.
So he's getting this incredibly intense intellectual education. But, you know, the human experience isn't purely intellectual. You can't just be a brain in a jar forever.
Why is that?
While his mind is being pulled in two different directions by philosophy, his physical body is being pulled by something far more primal, far more visceral.
Ah, yes.
And that brings us to the character of Claudia Chauchat and this profoundly bizarre theme of the erotic lure of disease.
Claudia Chauchat is entirely central to the alchemy of the mountain. She is essentially the Venus of the Berghof. Yes. She is a Russian patient, characterized by what the text describes as tartar slits for eyes. Her behavior is defined by a careless, languid rebellion.
She doesn't follow the rules.
Not at all. She constantly lets doors slam behind her, completely ignoring the strict, polite rules of the sanatorium. And Hans develops an incredibly intense, almost feverish, erotic obsession with her.
It is borderline absurd. He behaves like a stalker.
He really does.
He's tracking her movements, mentally recording her schedule, listening with bated breath for her to slam the dining room door every single day.
It's an all-consuming infatuation.
But what elevates this from a simple soap opera plot is how his romantic obsession gets inextricably entangled with a sudden, intense academic interest in biology and human anatomy.
Right.
He literally starts reading thick medical textbooks on his balcony under the light of the moon. He's out there studying the lymphatic system, cellular structure, embryology, the mechanics of disease.
This entanglement you mentioned raises a vital philosophical question about the profound connection between love, disease, and death in man's universe.
Yeah, they are all mixed together for Hans.
Very much so. A.S. Byatt astutely points out in her introduction that man, very much in the tradition of Leo Tolstoy, viewed death not as an abstract spiritual transition, but as a deeply physical, deeply sensual business.
Okay, sensual how?
Well, to Hans, Claudia's tuberculosis does not make her repulsive. On the contrary, her illness accentuates her physical body. Her disease, the fact that her cells are actively at war, makes her more fleshly, more vulnerable, and more viscerally real to him.
Yeah, and it reaches a point of absolute peak weirdness where the ultimate romantic keepsake he begs to keep from her isn't a lock of her hair, or a perfume-scented letter, or a photograph of her face.
No, it's something much more intimate.
It's an X-ray. He literally carries around a photographic plate of her skeletal structure and her diseased internal organs.
Because in a world that is entirely obsessed with the internal hidden decay of the human body, seeing the bones is the ultimate intimacy. It bypasses the illusion of the skin entirely, and the X-ray machine itself provides one of the most pivotal, jarring moments of realism in the entire novel.
Oh, this scene in the lab.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a scene where Hans goes into the X-ray room and looks through the fluoroscope at the bones of his own hand.
Just staring at his own skeleton.
Exactly. And in that specific moment, the philosophical debates with Settembrini and NAFTA just vanish. He isn't looking at humanist theory or theological terror. He realizes with pure, grim, unadorned realism that he is looking directly at his own death.
Yeah.
He is seeing the very skeleton that will outlast his flesh.
That is a terrifying moment of clarity. But, I have to push back a bit on the romanticization of this whole dynamic.
How so?
When I read about the atmosphere at the Berghof and this obsession with Claudia's illness, it doesn't feel like a profound romance to me. It feels like a very modern romanticization of trauma or victimhood.
I see what you mean.
It reminds me of the way some corners of the internet today fetishize being broken, where having a diagnosis or a trauma becomes your entire personality, and health is almost viewed as boring.
The aesthetic of illness.
Exactly. There is this incredible scene during Walpurgis Night, which is basically a chaotic Mardi Gras carnival held at the sanatorium.
Yes, the carnival chapter.
The patients are all drinking heavily, wearing paper hats, growing on fake mustaches, acting out. And Hans finally, after months of silence, works up the nerve to speak to Claudia.
He finally approaches her.
He approaches her, speaks to her in French, and what does he ask for? He doesn't declare his love. He asks to borrow a pencil.
You are correct to point out that this is not a traditional romance, but that pencil is far from a trivial detail.
It's not just a pencil.
No, we have to look at what Mann is actually doing here with the subconscious mind. That pencil links directly back to a deeply suppressed memory from Hans's own childhood. Years before, down in the flatlands, he harbored a profound, unspoken fascination and crush on a male schoolmate named Pribislav Hippe. And during that time, he asked Hippie to borrow a pencil.
So it's a repeating pattern.
Yes, but what is absolutely critical for you listening to understand here is the linguistic clue Mann drops. The name Hippie translates in German to scythe.
The scythe, as in the tool carried by the Grim Reaper.
Precisely. Mann is weaving an intricate subconscious web. Hans's intense attraction to Claudia on the mountain is a psychological reawakening of his attraction to Hippie from his childhood, which is a direct symbolic link to the Grim Reaper.
Oh, wow. So he's basically flirting with death.
Literally. This brings us squarely to the Freudian concept of the death drive, or thanatos.
Thanatos.
Yes. Freud's theories were highly influential during the period Mann was writing. Freud posited that alongside Eros, the drive for life, sex, and continuation, humans harbor an inherent, often unconscious drive towards self-destruction, return to the inorganic state, and death.
So the mountain's bringing that out in him.
Exactly. The magic mountain, with its thin air, its removal of consequences, and its constant focus on disease, strips away the societal defenses of the ego. It makes the characters fall deeply, erotically in love with their own decay. It is not a crush on a woman. It is a seduction by the abyss.
Okay, let's track where Hans is at this point. He's swimming in high-minded philosophy with Settembrini and NAFTA.
Yes.
He's drowning in this biological Freudian death drive romance with Claudia. And he's been sitting essentially motionless in that lounge chair for months, if not years on end.
He is quite stagnant physically.
Right. And eventually, pure intellect and suppressed desire hit a ceiling. He has to test these theories outside the safety of his 3 cushions.
You must take it.
He has to actually step off the balcony and face the physical reality of the mountain itself. Which brings us to what is arguably the most famous section of the book, the snow chapter.
The snow chapter is the absolute zenith of Hans Castorp's intellectual and spiritual journey. It is where all the disparate threads of alchemy, mythology, and philosophy finally collide with raw nature.
And the setup for it is incredibly tense. Hans essentially reaches a point of internal rebellion.
He's had enough of the routine.
Exactly. He's sick of the safe, meticulously maintained paths around the sanatorium grounds. He wants to experience the terror and the beauty of the real elements.
So he takes a risk.
A huge risk. He buys a pair of wooden skis, which, by the way, he barely knows how to use, and he heads out alone, deep into the high, untamed mountains.
A foolish endeavor.
Very. And, of course, a massive storm blows in. A blinding, deadly, completely disorienting whiteout. He gets hopelessly lost going in circles, unable to distinguish up from down.
The elements overwhelm him.
Yeah. He's exhausted, his core temperature is dropping, and in a moment of desperation, he drinks some strong port wine he brought with him, hoping it will warm him up.
Which, biologically speaking, is a terrible idea in freezing conditions.
Right. It dilates the blood vessels, you lose heat faster. Eventually, his body just gives out. He leans against the side of a locked hay shed in the driving snow and falls into a profound hallucinatory sleep on the edge of freezing to death.
Before we delve into the dream he has while leaning against that shed, we really must examine a profound realization he has just before his eyes close.
The snowflakes.
Yes. As he is standing in the whiteout, Hans looks closely at the snowflakes landing on his woolen sleeve. From his extensive biological and scientific reading on the balcony, he knows that every single snowflake is a perfectly symmetrical, hexagonal crystal.
Right. They are mathematically perfect.
Exactly. But standing in the lethal cold of the storm, he realizes that this absolute mathematical perfection is actually anti-organic. It is fundamentally hostile to life.
That specific detail stopped me in my tracks when I read it, because if you translate that to how we live today, it is such a massive indictment of modern culture.
How so?
Well, think about our modern pursuit of absolute optimization. We want the perfectly symmetrical life. We want a perfectly optimized morning routine, the flawless diet, the perfectly curated aesthetic, the frictionless schedule.
We strive for a sterile perfection.
Exactly. We are constantly striving for symmetry. But what Hans realizes, staring at those perfect geometric crystals that are actively trying to freeze him to death, is that true, biological life is inherently messy.
It requires chaos.
It requires friction, it requires deviation, warmth, and imperfection. Absolute symmetry is literally synonymous with death. The architects of ancient temples intentionally built tiny deviations into their stone columns because perfect symmetry felt dead to the human eye.
That's a beautiful point.
Hans is freezing to death in a world of perfect, optimized geometric snowflakes.
That is an excellent modern translation of the text philosophy. The mountain is perfect in its isolation, but it is dead. And this realization of the hostility of perfection bleeds directly into the hallucinatory dream he experiences as he drifts into hypothermia.
The dream by the shed.
Yes. The dream is a masterpiece of duality, heavily influenced by Nietzsche's concepts in The Birth of Tragedy.
Okay, break that down for us.
First, Hans experiences a profound Apollonian vision. Apollo in this context represents clarity, light, order, and beautiful illusion.
So, a positive vision.
Very positive. In his mind, Hans sees a breathtaking, sun-drenched Mediterranean bay. There are healthy, courteous, physically beautiful people living in perfect, joyful harmony.
It sounds like paradise.
It is. He sees mothers nursing babies, young men smiling and riding horses. It is the ultimate idyllic utopia, representing the highest ideals of Settembrini's humanism.
But the dream is a trapdoor, because right behind that beautiful civilized scene is a pure Dionysian horror.
Yes. Dionysus represents the dark, chaotic, bloody, irrational reality of raw nature and dissolution.
The exact opposite of Apollo.
Exactly. In the dream, Hans's gaze wanders away from the sunny beach and into a dark temple hidden within this landscape.
What does he see inside?
Inside the sanctuary, behind the heavy columns, he witnesses a terrifying sight. He sees two hideous, half-naked hags. They're actively dismembering and eating a living blonde child over a basin.
Oh, it is such a jarring, horrific image to encounter right after the sunny beach.
It is deeply disturbing.
But the brilliance of the chapter is that he wakes up from this nightmare, shivering against the shed with a massive synthesizing revelation. He realizes that the sunny, courteous people on the beach and the bloody hags in the temple are not separate realities.
They are one and the same.
Right. Health and horror are inextricably interdependent. You cannot have the beautiful illusion of civilization, of art and progress, without acknowledging the bloody, biological, destructive reality of nature that underpins it.
This is the exact moment Hans rejects the extreme dogmas of his two pedagogues.
He finally moves past Settembrini and Nafta.
He does. He realizes that Settembrini's shallow, optimistic reason completely ignores the bloody reality of the temple. Settembrini wants to pretend the hags just don't exist.
And Nafta.
Conversely, Nafta's dark, terror-worshipping nihilism ignores the beauty of the sunlit bay. Nafta wants to pretend only the hags exist.
Wow, it's such a perfect synthesis.
In the snow, facing imminent physical death, Hans makes a conscious, powerful choice. He declares internally that he will not grant death dominion over his thoughts.
He chooses life.
He realizes that what truly matters is his own heartbeat and love. And this is not the morbid, thanatos-driven love of decay he felt for Clavdia, but a life-affirming love that accepts the horror of existence, but consciously chooses to live anyway.
It's an incredible triumph. He figures it out. He solves the philosophical puzzle of the magic mountain.
He does achieve a state of enlightenment.
But, and this is where Thomas Mann just breaks your heart, the victory doesn't last.
No, it is tragic.
Hans survives the snowstorm. He manages to orient himself, he gets back on his skis, and he stumbles his way back to the warm, well-lit sanatorium. But almost as soon as he returns, the physical environment goes back to work on him.
The mountain reclaims him.
Yeah. The daily routine, the heavy multi-course meals, the comfortable three-cushion chair, the endless droning debates, it all washes the clarity of the dream away. The revelation is entirely fleeting. By dinner time, the profound epiphany he had in the snow is already slipping through his fingers like sand.
Which demonstrates that intellect and internal revelation have a ceiling.
What do you mean by that?
Hans has tried to master the mountain through thought alone, but thought cannot sustain itself against the sheer inertia of environment. The hermetic seal of the Berghof is just too strong. It requires something fundamentally disruptive from the outside.
And that disruption arrives in a form that nobody expects. Just when Hans is slipping back into his comfortable intellectual coma, the sanatorium is invaded by a force of nature even more powerful than the winter whiteout.
A truly monumental figure.
A character arrives who basically renders all these brilliant, highly educated intellectuals completely speechless. Let's dig into the arrival of Mynheer Peeperkorn.
Mynheer Peeperkorn is a monumental narrative disruption. He is a wealthy Dutch coffee planter who arrives at the Berghof from Java.
So he brings a totally different energy.
Exactly. He is suffering from a tropical fever, an illness of heat and excess, unlike the cold, consumptive illness of the mountain. And crucially, he is accompanied by Cleve de Chauchat, who has returned from a long absence.
Oh, the plot thickens.
Indeed. Peeperkorn is massive in stature, physically imposing, and entirely regal. He possesses what the novel reverently calls personality.
The guy is a walking hurricane. He sits at the dining table, orders enormous amounts of wine, eats voraciously, and completely dominates the physical space of the room.
He is a force.
But the most fascinating detail about him is that he rarely manages to finish a complete sentence.
It's true. He is highly inarticulate.
He stutters, he gestures wildly with his enormous hands. He says things like, absolutely, we must the dynamic, the feeling, and then just trails off. And yet everyone in the room just hangs on his every non-word.
They are mesmerized by him.
Settembrini and Nafta, who can argue complex theology and political science for hours in perfect, unbroken paragraphs, suddenly seem pale, articulate, but totally irrelevant next to him.
To understand why Peeperkorn's incoherence is actually his greatest power, we have to look at the archetype he represents.
Another archetype.
Yes. Peeperkorn is the embodiment of the Antaeus archetype.
Antaeus. Remind me who that is?
In Greek mythology, Antaeus was a giant who was completely invincible as long as he remained in physical contact with his mother, the earth.
Okay.
You couldn't defeat him with strategy or skill.
Yeah.
You had to sever his connection to the dirt. Thomas Mann modeled Peeperkorn heavily on the earthy, dominant, almost overwhelming physical natures of figures like Leo Tolstoy and Gerhard Hauptmann.
Men who are larger than life.
Precisely. Peeperkorn does not discuss life the way the intellectuals do. He does not theorize about it. He simply lives it, with massive appetite and massive suffering.
He just exists loudly.
He represents a savage, Dionysian, half-Asian life force. He overwhelms the hyper-articulate Western intellectualism of the sanatorium with pure presence, charisma, and physical gravity.
He makes the philosophers look like they are just playing parlor games.
He really does.
But while Peeperkorn's arrival is a shock to the system, his arc is tragic. And following his time at the sanatorium, the environment takes a really dark, disturbing turn.
The stagnation deepens.
Yeah. As the years drag on, and remember, Hans has been living in this isolated bubble for years now, the culture of the Berghof starts to actively decay. They go from debating high politics and philosophy to descending into superstition and the occult.
A very dark shift.
Dr. Krakowski, the resident psychoanalyst who used to give lectures on love and illness, stops talking about dreams and starts leading literal seances in the basement.
Right, trying to contact the other side.
He has the patients holding hands in the dark, trying to summon the spirits of dead patients, including Hans's deceased cousin, Joachim.
That's deeply morbid.
And Hans himself gets obsessively fixated on a new piece of technology, the gramophone. He sits alone in the dark for hours, playing a record of Schubert's Lindenbaum over and over again.
The descent into occultism and the obsession with the gramophone are intimately linked, and both signal the final toxic stage of the mountain's alchemy.
Okay, how are they linked?
Well, the song Lindenbaum, as Byatt notes, is deeply symbolic. It is a beautiful, melancholic German folk song about a man standing by a linden tree, dreaming of rest.
Sounds peaceful.
It does. But in the context of the Magic Mountain, its soothing, nostalgic melancholy is a siren song. It represents the ultimate seductive pull of the love for death that is embedded in the culture.
Ah, I
It is
see.
pulling Hans entirely away from the active, living world and into a state of permanent, passive longing.
You know, the descent into the seances felt exactly like the madness of cabin fever to me. If you are listening to this, ask yourself, why does a place originally dedicated to science, medicine, and healing become so obsessed with ghosts and the occult?
It's a profound question.
I liken it to what happens when human beings are isolated from the friction of practical daily action for too long. If you sit in an echo chamber completely disconnected from the real-world consequences of your actions, your brain's pattern recognition software just goes haywire.
It starts misfiring.
It starts connecting dots that aren't there. We see it constantly today. People isolated behind screens, alienated from their communities, tumbling down massive conspiracy theory rabbit holes, believing in magical thinking because reality has become too distant to touch.
That is an incredibly astute parallel. And it aligns perfectly with the warning Settembrini issues to Hans regarding the seances.
What does Settembrini say?
Settembrini, representing reason to the bitter end, tells Hans that when you willingly abandon the moral courage to differentiate between empirical reality and fraudulent mysticism, when you begin to blur the lines between the living and the dead for mere entertainment, you have crossed a terminal threshold.
That's a powerful warning.
It is. That blurring marks the end of life and the beginning of absolute nihilism. The Magic Mountain has stagnated entirely. The alchemical vessel hasn't produced gold, it has gone toxic.
They aren't getting better.
No, the patients are no longer healing, and they are no longer even learning. They are simply decaying in real time, playing games with the dead. The hermetic seal has become a coffin lid.
Wow.
It requires a massive, violent, world-shattering shock to break it open.
And that shock finally arrives. But it doesn't come from a new patient on the mountain, and it doesn't come from an intellectual debate. It comes from the flatlands far below.
The thunderbolt strikes.
The thunderbolt.
It is the summer of 1914, the outbreak of the First World War.
The trance of the Burkhoff is just shattered instantly. It's like someone threw a brick through a stained glass window or turned on the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights at the end of a very long, very strange party.
Reality breaks in.
Exactly. The people up here, who have spent years ignoring politics, ignoring reality, suddenly panic. The war obliterates their comfortable isolation. They all pack their bags in a frenzy and tumble back down the mountain.
The bubble bursts.
And Hans Castorp, who has been in this holding pattern for 7 years, is suddenly violently awakened and cast out into the fray.
We really must pause here to deeply appreciate the grim, heartbreaking irony of Thomas Mann's ending.
It's so tragic.
Think of the monumental internal journey Hans has been on. He spent 7 years in this meticulously controlled hermetic environment. He learned the intricacies of biology and cellular disease.
He became an intellectual.
Yes. He mapped the very nature of time. He absorbed the greatest philosophical debates of humanism, terror, and statecraft. He achieved a profound, almost mystical understanding of the interdependence of life and death during the snowstorm.
He went up as a naive engineer and came down as a profound philosopher.
Yes, the entire novel is structured as a parody of a Bildungsroman.
A Bildungsroman.
In literary terms, a Bildungsroman is a traditional German coming-of-age story where a young protagonist goes out into the world, faces trials, acquires knowledge, and eventually integrates back into society as a mature, productive adult ready to contribute to the future.
So Hans did the first part.
Hans does grow up. He does acquire profound world-class knowledge. But what is his reward? What is the ultimate resolution of his 7 years of enlightenment?
That's awful.
The society he is supposed to integrate into has decided to commit suicide. His graduation from the Magic Mountain is to be thrown straight into the mechanized, industrialized meat grinder of World War I. We last see our thoughtful, highly educated, deeply introspective Hans Castorp charging through the mud, the shrapnel, and the absolute carnage of a Flanders battlefield.
And the detail that crushes me every time is what he's doing in that final scene. He's running through the mud and he's singing Schubert's Lindenbaum under heavy artillery fire.
Precisely. The song that functioned as a symbol of beautiful, melancholic folk culture, the song that represented a safe, romanticized love of death, while he was sitting comfortably in the dark on the magic mountain.
It becomes real.
It suddenly becomes the chilling, literal soundtrack to actual industrialized mass death. The intellectual romanticism of death is brutally stripped away by the reality of mechanized warfare. The mountain was theory, the battlefield is reality.
The farewell scene right before he leaves really cements this tragic reality. As Hans is getting on the train to finally leave the mountain, Settembrini is there to see him off.
His mentor.
Right. For 7 years, Settembrini has kept this polite, pedagogical, intellectual distance. He's always referred to Hans formally as engineer. But as the train is about to depart, sending Hans to almost certain death, the facade of the intellectual mentor finally drops.
A moment of pure humanity.
Settembrini embraces Hans and calls him by his first name, Giovanni. It's a heartbreaking moment of genuine human connection, but it comes too late.
Far too late.
It made me realize that reality, no matter how brutal, no matter how long you try to delay it, eventually comes to collect its debts. You can hide in the waiting room of life, you can perfectly optimize your rest cure, you can debate high philosophy and read medical textbooks for 7 years, but the world is going to happen regardless of whether you are ready for it.
And that, I believe, is Thomas Mann's most powerful, enduring thesis.
The need for action.
Exactly. The pursuit of knowledge, the deep introspection, the alchemical enhancement of the soul, these are vital human endeavors. But if they are completely divorced from action, if they are separated from consequence and responsibility in the real world, they become a form of living death.
Right.
Hans spent 7 years learning how to think about life. But in doing so, he forgot how to actually live it in the flatlands, until the flatlands came violently crashing up to claim him.
Okay, let's step back, take a breath, and really unpack what this massive journey means for us listening today. Thank you for making this climb up the mountain with us.
It's a heavy subject, but so important.
It is. Over the course of this deep dive, we've explored how physical and mental isolation can completely distort your perception of time and reality. We've seen how the human mind, when left unchecked and disconnected from action, can be torn apart by the extremes of hyper-rational, optimistic algorithm feeds and dark, doom-scrolling mysticism.
The battle of the pedagogues in our own minds.
Exactly. We learned from a freezing snowflake that absolute mathematical perfection is actually hostile to life, that true vitality requires warmth, friction, and messy imperfection.
And we saw the dangers of fetishizing our own decay.
Yes, how an obsession with mortality or even an endless obsession with self-improvement and optimization can paradoxically keep you from actually participating in the world you are trying to improve for.
The true, lasting genius of the Magic Mountain is that it does not allow the reader to remain a passive observer. It forces us to actively identify our own personal magic mountains.
We all have them.
We do. Yours might be an echo chamber of online political debates, where you feel intellectually superior and highly engaged without actually doing anything tangible to help your community.
That's a big one today.
It might be an endless cycle of wellness optimization, where you focus so intensely on perfecting your diet, your sleep, and your metrics that you simply forget to experience the joy of living.
Just lying in the lounge chair taking your temperature.
Precisely. Or it might simply be a comfortable, isolated daily routine that safely insulates you from the demanding, messy, unpredictable reality of the society around you.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with, something to deeply mull over the next time you find yourself retreating into your own comfortable, isolated bubble.
A parting question.
We've talked about the thunderbolt that shattered Hans Castorp's world. Imagine that a thunderbolt struck your life today. If an undeniable world-shifting force suddenly shattered your most comfortable routines, broke your hermetic seal, and forced you out the door, what flatlands would you suddenly find yourself standing in?
A very confronting thought.
Look closely at the books you read, the debates you engage in, the podcasts you consume, and the wellness routines you meticulously follow. Are you truly using your pursuit of knowledge and self-improvement to prepare yourself for action in the real world? Or, if you are being brutally honest with yourself, are you just using it as an elaborate, intellectually satisfying excuse to hide from it?